Well, the Australian media have been duped by a woman who claimed to be an impartial United Nations rapporteur, but in actual fact was here on a trip funded by the Palestinian lobby. You'll remember the publicity sweep that Francesca Albanese did on Australian television, where she only had angry words to say about Israel.
Israel cannot claim the right of self-defense against a threat that emanates from the territory it occupies. The thing is that there shouldn't have been a blockade for 16 years enabling Hamas to rule over Gaza as it has done against the will of the people. 56 years ago and 40 years ago, Hamas was not there and Israel was building settlements, and they are illegal, both in the West Bank and in occupied East Jerusalem.
Is Hamas using this hospital as a command centre?
You need to ask Israel to provide the proof that it is using it. Because look, we have gone through 5 major wars before this one, and Israel has attacked hospitals and ambulances claiming that they were being used by Hamas for military purposes, and most of these cases the allegations proved false. I'm just saying, precedents.
Oh, propaganda. And when she was on Sky News, Pete Stefanovic did a tough interview with her and put her through her paces. But Francesca Albanese's bias was then further exposed when the project host, Waleed Ali, asked her this very important question. What would be the right response from Israel to the terror attacks on October 7? Well, her answer? Zero response from Israel. Nothing. Have a look.
In your view, what would the correct response have looked like?
The response was to be given in terms of law enforcement, because Gaza is occupied and it's under belligerent occupation. So Israel has powers to enforce the law and to pursue all security measures that are deemed necessary, considering that this is occupied territory. It could have relied on the United Nations to demilitarize Hamas if this was the target.
So, no, Israel shouldn't have responded to the worst terror attacks, the worst loss of life for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Oh, just send in the UN to take weapons off Hamas. What a farcical response. The Red Cross haven't even been able to visit the Israeli hostages, as if the UN could have taken weapons off Hamas. Now, if that interview with the project and all of her public commentary didn't expose her claims of independence as fraudulent, well, what I'm about to tell you certainly does. Well, first, the Executive Director of United Nations Watch, Hillel Neuer, came on this program on Tuesday evening, and he showed us how Francesca pretends to be neutral, but actually has a long history of dangerous remarks against Israel.
Neither her position nor her own background have anything to do with impartiality. Her mandate is only to investigate Israel, and the reason they picked her is because she is extremely biased. This is someone who, in 2014, wrote on Facebook that, quote, America is subjugated by the Jewish lobby. This is someone who a year ago, in November 2022, spoke to a Hamas conference of terrorists, and she said, quote, you have a right to resist. This is someone who has regularly compared the situation of Palestinians to the Nazi Holocaust. So she is the last thing that has anything to do with impartiality, neutrality, objectivity, and she should be exposed.
Well, Hillel Neuer, as I said, from United Nations Watch, he's now revealed that Albanese's trip to Australia was sponsored by Palestinian lobby groups. And these groups, the Australian Friends of Palestine Association, the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network, as well as the Free Palestine Melbourne and Palestinian Christians in Australia groups. This is in breach of the United Nations' own code of conduct that bars experts from taking any gift, favour or remuneration. Article 3 of the Code of Conduct states that UN figures should be, and I quote, free from any kind of extraneous influence, either direct or indirect, and they may not seek or accept any favour, gift or remuneration from any non-governmental source for activities carried out in pursuit of his or her mandate. Well, United Nations Watch has now filed papers with the UN chief calling for Francesca Albanese's removal from her position as UN Special Rapporteur. And she should immediately be removed. And she should have made it clear in every single one of those media appearances, on the ABC's Q&A, at the National Press Club, on the project, that her trip was sponsored by Palestinian lobby groups. Jewish groups had sent a letter to the ABC demanding that Francesca Albanese not be given a platform on Q&A because of all of the disgraceful and anti-Semitic views she's expressed in the past. Well, the ABC ignored the demand and had her on the show anyway. Now it seems the public broadcaster owes Australian viewers and the Jewish community an apology. They presented someone as independent when in fact she was here being paid to be in Australia to sprout hateful views against Israel and Jews. To discuss, joining me now, commentator Jason Morrison and former Speaker of the House, Bronwyn Bishop. Welcome to you both. Bronwyn, what's your reaction to this? It looks like a fraud, if not a clear conflict of interest.
I'm not surprised. I bothered to take a look. Since the inception of the United Nations Human Rights Council, there have been 45 motions condemning Israel. The United Nations clearly just is against Israel again and again and again, and she's part of that. But it does make you ask this question. The sheer brutality of what was done on the 7th of October, which people wouldn't publish because of how it would affront. I think people need to know that brutality because what it was designed to do, perhaps, was to make Israel retaliate with force and say we're going to get rid of Hamas. In the meantime, there's been a work right across the Palestinian support groups to drum up anti-Semitism or Jew hatred right across the world. Plus the United Nations send her out here to try and give it a bit of respectability and don't identify her as being part of that Palestinian pan movement. And when I see those children in the streets...
Yes, today in Melbourne.
I just go back to the tactics that socialists around the world always use, and it's in their DNA. They all have a youth movement. And the reason is that they're easier to persuade. There's little resistance because the knowledge base isn't there. And so it's not surprising to me that those people who are activists within the education system and in places of power can use it to drum up those kids to be sprouting things, many of which I would think some of them didn't even know the meaning of.
Oh, I mean, a lot of what they were saying today at those school protests in Melbourne. And Jason, there were hundreds of school students there. They're meant to be in class. Instead, they're being indoctrinated to hate Israel and Jews.
And they'll be back tomorrow. There's one organised in Sydney, and the propaganda, I'll call it that, that's being passed around on social media, it's vile stuff, and it's kids saying it. I mean, these aren't university... idiots, you classic dickheads from university out saying it. These are children in high schools that are now repeating this stuff. But, back a little step on this UN lady.
Albanese.
Doesn't it say so much about the Australian media? Did anyone for a moment stop and think, hang on, there's a crisis in the Middle East right now, and she's out here doing the press club in Australia, right in the middle of all of this, that she thought this where she should be right now is here, and no one stopped to say, hey, who's paying for you? Or did anyone for a minute, and this is an insight into the Australian media, if you put the letters UN in front of anyone's name or professor in front of someone's name, there's sort of this sort of suggestion, particularly in the ABC, that they're beautifully white and partial, clean. They're not affected by bias or prejudice. That's her. It was a giveaway from the moment she opened a trap that she was out here on a propaganda tour and nobody stopped. And how many times did she pop up on the ABC? In your little montage, I think twice. Then there's ABC Radio that would have had a few cracks at her, and she would have been reported repeatedly in the news. And no one, all these journalists that are apparently there to look into the depth of all of these things, no one stopped for a second to ask the question. And those organisations that sponsored her, don't forget that many of those organisations are directly or indirectly supported by government agencies, given funding through multicultural grants, either directly or indirectly. So, the taxpayer is kicking in on all of this.
Yeah.
It is disgraceful, and good on you and UN Watch for calling it out. And to the Australian media that kind of missed it, I don't know where you're looking.